In the year 193 AD, the most powerful empire on earth was put up for sale. Not conquered, not raided, auctioned. And the men running the auction were the soldiers of Rome itself. Two rich men stood outside the camp of the emperor's own bodyguard and bid against each other for the throne of the world, like buyers haggling at a cattle market. The winner promised a small fortune to every single soldier. In return, the army handed him an empire of 50 million people. His name was Didius Julianus, and he had literally bought Rome. He would wear the purple for just 66 days before the same kind of men who sold it to him took it back, along with his head. But stop and think about what this even means. How does the army sworn to protect Rome end up selling it? This is the second death of Rome. Not the slow rot of money we followed last time, but something faster and far bloodier. The day Rome's own shield turned into a sword and pointed it at Rome's own heart. And it began, the way most disasters do, with a completely reasonable idea. When Augustus ended a century of civil war and became Rome's first emperor, he had a problem. He ruled through fear and love, but fear needs muscle. So he created an elite bodyguard, the Praetorian Guard. Around 9,000 of the best-paid, best-connected soldiers in the empire, and the only troops allowed near the city of Rome. On paper, it was insurance. In practice, Augustus had just placed the sharpest swords in the empire permanently inside arm's reach of the throne and given them a very good look at exactly how power worked. It would take them only a couple of generations to draw the obvious conclusion. Here is the oldest question in politics. Who guards the guards? Because the man who controls the emperor's bodyguard controls the emperor. And under the second emperor, Tiberius, the commander of the guard, a schemer named Sejanus, very nearly seized the whole empire from the inside simply by being the man closest to the throne. Sejanus was caught and destroyed. But the guard itself survived, and it had learned something dangerous about its own strength. The bodyguard had discovered it was stronger than the body it guarded. All it needed now was the nerve to act on it. It would not have to wait long. In 41 AD, the guard crossed the line for the first time. The Emperor Caligula had grown cruel and paranoid, insulting the very officers meant to protect him. So his own Praetorians cut him down in a palace passage. For the first time, the bodyguard had killed the body, and now they faced a problem of their own making. With the emperor dead, who would pay them? The story says a guard found Caligula's uncle, Claudius, hiding behind a curtain, certain he was next to die. Instead, the soldiers dragged him out and made him emperor on the spot. Not the Senate, not the law, the guard. Because they needed a man on the throne who owed them everything and would pay for the privilege. And to seal it, Claudius paid each guardsman a massive cash bonus, a donativum. It looks like a one-time bribe. It was actually the invention of a market. From that day, the guard understood the deal with perfect clarity. A new emperor pays, a generous emperor lives, and an emperor who does not pay can always be replaced by one who will. For the next century, every emperor paid the guard to take the throne, and paid again to keep it. The price only went up. The soldiers had turned the most sacred office in the Roman world into a subscription, and they held the power to cancel it. Slowly, quietly, the throne stopped belonging to Rome and started belonging to whoever the guard was willing to protect that year. Which brings us back to the auction. In 193, a tough, old-fashioned emperor named Pertinax tried to do the unthinkable. He tried to discipline the guard and cut their pay back to something sane. He lasted 3 months. The guard stormed his palace and killed him. And then, with no emperor and no plan, they did the most honest thing they had ever done. They put the empire up for sale. This was not a metaphor. Roman writers describe it plainly. The guards announced that the empire would go to whoever paid the most. Bids were shouted up to the walls. Didius Julianus outbid a rival, promised each soldier the price of a small estate, and walked away the owner of the Roman world. The shield had finished becoming a sword, and now it was selling the man it was supposed to protect. But the guard had forgotten something. They were 9,000 men. Out on the frontiers stood hundreds of thousands more, the real armies, and they were watching. If the palace guard could sell the empire, why should the legions who actually fought Rome's wars accept the buyer? 3 frontier generals were hailed emperor by their troops almost at once and began marching on Rome. The winner was Septimius Severus, a general from Africa with the toughest legions behind him. He marched into Rome, executed the man who had bought the throne, and disbanded the old Praetorian Guard entirely. It looked like order restored. It was the opposite. He had just proven the new law of Rome out loud. The throne belongs to whoever brings the biggest army, and Severus knew it. On his deathbed, the tough old soldier gave his sons the only advice that now mattered in Rome. Enrich the soldiers, he said, and ignore everyone else. That was it. That was the whole imperial constitution now, reduced to a single sentence. Keep the army paid and keep the army happy. Nothing else about Rome mattered anymore. Once every soldier believed that, the last break was gone. The disease jumped from the palace guard to every army in the empire. And Rome fell into the 50 years we touched on last time, the crisis of the 3rd century. Around 26 emperors in half a century, and this is the part that matters here. Almost none of them died fighting foreigners. They were killed by their own soldiers. The pattern became almost mechanical. An army declares its general emperor. He marches on Rome. He wins or he loses. Either way, within months, a rival army declares its general emperor. The soldiers killed the man they had crowned the moment a better offer appeared. Some emperors ruled for years, some for weeks, a few barely long enough to have their faces struck on a coin. Notice where the power has physically moved. For centuries, Rome was ruled from the Senate, by men in togas arguing about law. Now it was ruled from a tent on the Danube, by men in armor counting spears. The emperor was no longer the cleverest politician in Rome. He was simply the general the soldiers had not yet decided to murder. The state had been swallowed by its own military. The emperors of this age were not born to purple. They were rough soldiers who had clawed up through the ranks, often from the poorest provinces, crowned by their men on a battlefield. Some were brilliant generals who genuinely saved the empire from collapse. It did not matter. Save Rome or lose it, the reward was almost always the same. A knife from your own side. Eventually, a run of hard soldier emperors clawed the empire back from the edge. The greatest, Diocletian, tried to tame the beast for good. If armies made emperors, he would control the armies. He split the empire so no single general could grab it all and wrapped the throne in ceremony to make it feel untouchable again. It worked for a while, but look closely, and the cure is the disease wearing a crown. Diocletian did not break the army's grip on power. He just divided the throne among 4 generals instead of 1. The empire was still a machine run by soldiers, for soldiers. He had managed the symptom brilliantly and left the sickness exactly where it was. And the moment strong hands let go, the killing started again. And there was a deeper rot underneath. To fill the endless wars, the emperors packed the legions with barbarian recruits, whole units of Goths and Franks fighting under Roman banners. Brave soldiers, but their loyalty was to their commander and their pay, not to some idea of Rome. Slowly, the army defending Rome stopped being Roman at all. By the final century of the Western Empire, the emperors were mostly figureheads. The real power was a handful of warlord generals, many of them of barbarian blood, who commanded the armies and installed or removed emperors, like changing a signboard. The throne had become a chair that the strongest soldier let a weak man sit in, for as long as it was useful. And so we arrive at the end of the road that started with Augustus's bodyguard. The last true Western emperor was a boy, a teenager placed on the throne by his own father, a general, as a convenient puppet. Behind him stood the army, now almost entirely commanded by a barbarian officer who had grown tired of pretending. That officer was named Odoacer. In 476 AD, he did what the army had been inching toward for 400 years. He did not buy the throne. He did not fight for it. He simply took the boy emperor off it, sent him away with a pension, and did not bother to appoint a replacement. The soldiers no longer even needed the fiction of an emperor. The sword had swallowed the throne whole. Odoacer even sent the imperial robes and crown east to the surviving emperor in Constantinople with a cold little message. The West does not need its own emperor anymore. One army officer would rule Italy in the emperor's name, and everyone understood that the name was all that was left. The most powerful office in history had been made redundant by its own guards. Think about how strange this ending is. There was no great foreign conqueror at the gates. The men who ended the Western Roman Empire were, in the most literal sense, the Roman army. Rome had spent 5 centuries teaching its soldiers that they, not the state, were the true source of power. In the end, the soldiers simply believed it. And now watch how this death and the last one feed each other. The debased money could not properly pay the soldiers. Underpaid soldiers sold the throne to whoever promised more. Each new emperor needed more money to buy the army, so he debased the coins even further, which enraged the soldiers even more. Money and murder locked in a spiral, each one driving the other down. This is what makes an internal death so unstoppable. A foreign enemy you can meet at the border and defeat. But when the very institution meant to defend the state becomes the thing looting it, there is no border to defend. The threat is already inside the walls, wearing the uniform, holding the keys, and signing its own paychecks. From Augustus's 9 tidy cohorts to Odoacer's warlords, it took Rome 4 centuries to fully arm the weapon that killed it. Not one dramatic betrayal, but a slow drift. One donativum, one murdered emperor, one auction at a time, until the army had quietly become the only real government Rome had left. And that government answered to no one but itself. So here is the answer to our question. How does the army sworn to defend Rome end up destroying it? By slowly being taught that it, and not the law, was where power really came from. Rome did not fall because its soldiers were weak. It fell because its soldiers were strong and finally understood it. The shield Augustus forged to guard the throne spent 500 years learning that it could simply take it. This is the second death. Not conquest from without, but the sword turning inward. There is a brutal law hidden in this story, and it is older than Rome. Any ruler who must buy the loyalty of his soldiers has already lost it. Loyalty that can be purchased can always be outbid. Once the army learns that the throne is for sale, no amount of money, no reform, no ceremony can unteach it. The soldiers will keep selling it, to the next man and the next, until there is nothing left worth buying. And Rome was not the last to learn it. Again and again in history, states have built powerful guards and standing armies to protect their rulers, and again, those guards have discovered the same intoxicating truth. The hand that holds the sword can also hold the crown. The uniforms change, the palace changes, the temptation never does, which brings this journey around again. We began with an Egypt so old the pyramids were ancient to Cleopatra, and watched Rome swallow it. Then we watched Rome poison itself with its own money. And now we have watched its own army devour the throne from the inside. 2 deaths down, both of them self-inflicted, neither of them a foreign sword. And that leaves the strangest death of all. Because if the money had already collapsed, and the army had already devoured the throne, then by 476 there was almost nothing left of the Western Empire to actually kill. The state had been hollowed out from the inside twice over, so a genuinely disturbing question remains. When did Rome actually end? Because while the West was being auctioned and hollowed out, the richer eastern half never fell at all. It kept a real government, a real treasury, and a real emperor. And it went right on calling itself Rome and being called Rome by everyone around it for another 1,000 years after that boy emperor was quietly retired. The people we now call Byzantines never used that word. To themselves, they were Romans, plain and simple. Their emperor was the Roman emperor. Their empire was the Roman Empire, unbroken since Augustus. From where they stood, Rome had not fallen in 476 at all. It had merely lost a troublesome western province and carried on. So the third death of Rome is not a rot, like the money, or a betrayal, like the army. It is something far harder to pin down. It is the death of an idea. The slow 1,000-year question of when the Roman Empire finally, truly stopped existing, and whether it ever really did at all. Long after the last soldier emperor was dust, kings and sultans and emperors across 3 continents would still fight to call themselves the true heir of Rome, to claim its crown, its eagle, its name. An empire that had been murdered by its own money and its own army somehow refused to actually die. It just changed shape and kept haunting the world. That is the puzzle we will end this series on. Not how Rome died, but why it never quite managed to. Because the deepest kind of empire does not live in its coins or its legions. It lives in an idea so powerful that it outlasts the state that created it. And that idea, it turns out, is almost impossible to kill. We have watched the money die. We have watched the army devour the throne. One death remains, and it is the strangest story of all. The empire that fell, and yet somehow reigned for another 1,000 years. The Rome that would not die. That is where this journey ends. The most powerful empire in history was not killed by barbarians at the gate. It was killed twice from within, by its own money and its own soldiers. And then it did the most Roman thing of all. It refused to admit it was dead, and went on ruling from a new city for 1,000 more years. Next, we follow the empire that would not die, east to Constantinople, and finally answer the question this whole series has been circling. Not how the greatest empire on earth fell, but the far stranger truth of when and whether Rome ever truly ended at all. That is the third and final death of Rome. Subscribe so you are there for the ending nobody sees coming.